Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a solo episode, and what I want to talk about today is meal timing and around your workouts specifically. I feel like this is something that gets brought up a lot, and I want to go over some misconceptions, what we actually need to focus on, and what I think is the most important thing to focus on. But first, before we go into that, if you are interested in body recomp, what it is, how to do it, what some common mistakes, different types of and then 10 things that you need to do for body recomp, then my free checklist is for you. Again, the link to that is in the show notes. So download that. You can always reach out to me if you have any questions on anything specific in there, but I think that'll be super helpful. Plus, if you download it, I also will throw in 2 free resources around stress management and sleep/circadian rhythm that to me is an overlooked thing when it comes to body comp change. So with that out of the way, let's dive into today's topic. So what I want to talk about is pre-workout meals. Just the thought of meal timing in general. I think meal timing is one thing that some people will shrug off. I think so you have 2 ends of the spectrum here. You have people that just kind of shrug it off and they don't focus on it at all, and that's going to hurt their performance. And then I think you have people that overly focus on it and they think it is a bigger deal than what it actually is. Now, I'm going to talk about when pre-workout meals, particularly from carbohydrates, are going to be more important. But when it comes to, if we're just kind of resistance training for our resistance training sessions and even cardio, like I think really what we need to look at is how do you feel in your sessions? Do you feel like you're tiring out? Like then we would need to look into that more and okay, maybe we do need to change things around a little bit. But when it comes to weight training sessions, I think people overthink it when really at the end of the day, like if we're nailing everything else like for the rest of the day, I think we can have a little bit more wiggle room with our weight training sessions. But in saying that, I also think that one, you need to experiment. So at the end of the day here, before we dive into anything, experimentation is key to see what you like. But so again, how do you respond? But I also think it is a thing that is just easily overlooked and it can potentially impact, especially more so in the post-workout more than anything. So again, it's going to come down to experimentation for you. To me, it's a little bit of what phase you're in as well too can potentially impact it as well too. And there's going to be times where carbs and stuff like that are going to be more important than other times. So again, calories are going to be really the most important thing that matter here, right? When it comes to fat loss and muscle gain. And again, like we know that's most important when it comes to changing your body comp, everything like that. But I do think meal timing can be overlooked because it can have more of an impact on your body composition and not necessarily like scale weight per se. Meal timing in general, yes, I think people overlook, but particularly around workouts is an overlooked factor when it comes to body comp, regardless of whether you're in a deficit or a surplus. That over time could impact your body comp if you completely screw it up. So here's my kind of 3 main things around meal timing, and then I'm going to talk about meal timing around your workouts. And then I'm going to talk about one thing that I think is super important. And then maybe when we do need to focus a little bit more on what we're consuming before our workouts. And then I'll talk to you about what I do based on what I've experienced for myself. So one of the big things being like when we talk timing around our workouts, this isn't necessarily before, this is just in general with around our workouts. We want to get protein in around our workout. Okay. If you're going in fasted, we want to aim to get protein 60 minutes after you work out. If you've already eaten 1 to 2 hours before, you can push this to 1 to 2 hours post-workout, but we don't really want to wait too much longer. So this is the one that I see people screw up the most is they go too long of time around their workouts without getting protein in initially or afterwards as well too. Again, total daily protein intake needs to be there because we can nail this and then not eat enough protein for the day. But we can, again, from a body composition standpoint, I think this is a small thing that if you add up over time, it will start to impact things a little bit. So that's the first thing that I'm going to try to do with clients is we want to get some protein in around our workouts. Protein on the front end isn't necessarily going to help performance, but if you're training early in the day or you're going in fasted, again, it can help from a recovery standpoint we have a little bit more wiggle room after our workout. Whereas if you go in fasted, then it's going to be more important that we get protein in following our workout there. Number 2, and this goes with like pre-workout more so than anything, you don't need the perfect macro combo. You just probably don't want to be super hungry going into your training session. So especially when we're looking at weight training. Again, I'll talk about when carbohydrates before training can be beneficial, but I think at the end of the day, we just want to avoid being hungry. Carbs can help, but you don't need a lot unless you're doing super high training volume or things like HIIT or super intense, like high volume leg session from a carb standpoint. But the big thing just being is like, you don't have to be like, oh, hey, I need to have this perfect meal beforehand. Oh, if I have that, it's going to screw up my training. I think the big thing is we probably just don't want to be super hungry and we likely don't want to be super full going into our training. So those are the 2 big things. Now, again, I think that is person by person dependent. So some people may do better on being a little bit hungry when they train. And then some people like it sucks for them. So it just depends on where you're at. from that perspective. This could be a thing where you've always just gone into your workout fasted, and you don't really know what it could be like to do it the other way. So that is something that we do want to think about there. As I said, protein itself isn't going to help improve performance unless you feel better with a little food in your system. As I said, protein itself is not going to boost training performance, but now this comes back to, hey, there's been studies that have shown that like just being not as hungry can help from a training performance, right? And it doesn't really necessarily matter what you consume. It's just, hey, we just don't want to be overly hungry. So if you always train fasted, you could try experimenting with a small pre-workout snack and see how it feels. It can be light. It doesn't have to be a massive 500-calorie meal. I think something like Greek yogurt or whey protein plus like fruit and toast. Now, here's the thing with this. So context, in a fat loss phase, being in a calorie deficit is still the priority. So you need to make sure you're accounting for those calories. So what you want to be careful with is, oh, hey, Jeff said if I eat a little bit before my workout session, I may feel better, and that's good. But now you do have to account for those calories elsewhere. Now, it could be a thing where you eat a little bit more food beforehand. Now you're able to like push yourself more and maybe you expend a little bit more energy and it offsets a little bit. But initially we need to account for those calories somewhere else along the line there. So you can't just add it in. You have to really in any phase, but specifically a fat loss phase. Because again, I could see somebody do this where it's, oh, hey, I'm trying to drop body fat, I'm struggling to get in a deficit. Now I'm just going to add more food on. That may not be the case there. So the main takeaway with this is you don't need to feel pressure to hit the perfect ratio of macros. We just don't want to let hunger interfere with your performance. Okay. I also think that is a very case by case basis there. Again, after I go over these 3 kind of meal timing tips for around your workout, I'm going to go over when pre-workout carbs are going to be more beneficial. We likely want to avoid large, high-fat meals right before training. Fat takes longer to digest, and a large amount can leave you feeling sluggish during the workout. So we want to stick to lighter, easily digestible meals or snacks to keep energy levels up. So you just want to make sure you're not eating this like super fatty, greasy, high fat like meal right before, because again, that could impact your training. It's, oh, hey, I need to be full going into training, so I'm going to eat a large pizza beforehand. You're probably not going to feel great, right? You're going to feel very sluggish in that workout. So we just want to be careful with that. I think if we can nail these 3 things, you're going to be in a good spot. That's as in depth as I feel like we need to go with it. And then from there, it is just making sure that we're managing your entire day. Now, if you have a strategy that works best for you, and again, I'm going to go over times when before your workout are going to be more beneficial, and you may want to mess around with that and see. But I think if we're here, we don't need to overly stress the meal timing around our workouts, especially when we're coming from a standpoint of just like your zone 2 training, maybe your intervals, and then also like your regular hypertrophy training. I don't think we need to go any further than that there to make it confusing. And as I said, if you're not sure about your optimal meal timing, just experiment. Everybody's different. So the key is to find what fuels you best, both for energy and recovery. So I personally have found that I don't want to be hungry going into my training session. It impacts how I perform. I also want to eat. So that means I want to eat at least 1 to 3 hours before my training session. And again, I am someone that like, I want to really maximize performance. And so I'll go over the carbohydrate thing. I do try and get some carbs before my workout, but that's just because again, when I train, it could be a thing where, if I trained early in the morning, I may just opt for something like a Greek yogurt and a piece of toast or a piece of fruit, like I talked about. So then that way I just get something. And I have had to do that before when I've had a busy day and things are going on. So I think you can be flexible with it, but most of the time I am getting some sort of like, typically what my meal is going to look like, my pre-workout meal, it's going to be, at least right now, it's some Greek yogurt, 20 to 30 grams of protein, most of that protein coming from the Greek yogurt, and then a bagel with peanut butter, and then like an orange or something like that. That's typically what my pre-workout meal is going to look like right now. Depending on what phase I'm in, I may have 2 bagels. I may have a couple more pieces of fruit. I may have some other stuff to add in to get a little bit more calories. But right now, that's what my meal looks like there. All right. So now let's go into, just to update things, I still want to go over carbohydrates in the work, like beforehand, when does it matter a bit more? And then I also want to go over the thing that people often overlook that I think is most important here. But for me though, I do keep this pre-workout meal like fairly light. But none of that is going to be something that's going to make me feel like overly stuffed, just because I've had days where I've had leftovers, whether it be like salmon or whatever type of leftovers we've had. And anytime I do that, I just don't feel as great because that stuff, not that salmon's bad, but it's like salmon with fish and some other things like salmon higher in fat. I just have found like when I eat a full like balanced meal like that, I tend to not feel as good in my training. I feel a little bit more worn down. So that's why I keep it fairly light, right? It gives me enough calories and satiety to feel strong in my session, but not so heavy that I feel sluggish during it there. So when do pre-workout carbs help more? We're likely looking at workouts that last longer than 60 plus minutes. Most resistance training sessions, I feel shouldn't last that long. Sometimes they do. But again, if you're It's not just, hey, you check off one thing and you should just consume it like a ton of carbs. Again, it has to fit into your entire day. But when we time those carbs, it can be helpful there. So again, workouts lasting longer than 60 minutes after 8+ hours fasting. So early morning training, for example, if you always train fasted, you may find that your training is a bit better with some carbohydrates in that meal. Lower body or full body sessions, right? So we're using a lot more muscle in general there. I think the key being lower body. High intensity or high volume workouts when you're feeling flat or low energy, or when you just prefer to train with food in your system. Like I said, I personally can't stand training hungry. But as I said, your total daily carb intake matters more than the exact timing. If you do eat before training, just make sure it fits within your calories and macros for the day. And as I said, sometimes just not feeling super hungry is enough to help with performance. So we do want to just test it out. Bottom line, pre-workout carbs aren't a must, but they can help depending on your workout schedule and personal preference. Another kind of time when they can be helpful is if you did have another training session like early in the day. And so getting some carbs in between then can be super helpful. So hopefully that helps you in terms of your pre-workout meal. I think the big thing being, hey, we want to get some protein around our training. We don't have to have this perfect macro setup before your workout. It's just, hey, let's make sure we're not going in super hungry if that bothers you. For some people, that's not a big deal. But if we're training in the middle of the day, we likely don't want to go into that fast. Like we want to get some nutrition in there. And then we just want to avoid like really large, heavy meals before our training. And then from there, if you want to try carbohydrates, I talked about when carbs might help a little bit more 1 to 2 hours before your training, but we always got to go back to those first 3 things there. One specific fruit that I think is going to be super helpful, watermelon. I think watermelon could be a great pre-workout to have. Biggest thing being is one, it's going to help with hydration. It's around 90% water, contains some potassium. It's going to help give you some electrolytes. It's also a natural source of citrulline. So L-citrulline is an amino acid that can increase nitric oxide levels, helping with blood flow pumps and nutrient delivery during training. Yeah, you're not going to see the full benefit because, okay, you're going to have to eat a ton of watermelon to probably get like a supplement amount, but still, I think any amount can help. And again, it's light on the stomach. And so it's easy to digest and it makes a great option for if you don't like having that heavy meal before training. So that brings me to my next thing why I think this next thing to me is super important. People often talk about meal timing, the perfect meal, etc. What I think is honestly more important and that what you really need to focus on is your hydration around your training. To me, hydration is more important when it comes to training performance. And when our performance is impacted, we have a lower training output. Lower output is a slower or lack of body comp results over time, right? 1 to 2% hydration, which can literally happen from something as simple as not drinking enough throughout the day. And it's hardly noticeable. It can lead to decreased training performance, higher levels of fatigue and pain, and lower training output. So again, we're looking at higher levels of fatigue and pain, meaning like you're going to tire out way before you actually feel like you need to. In turn, that means you're not going to be able to take the target muscle as close to failure. Plus, if we're not hydrated, that's going to impact our adaptations as well too. So again, lower training output's going to lead to slower/less results. Dehydration reduces plasma volume, which decreases blood flow to your muscles. That means less oxygen and nutrient delivery, slower clearance of fatigue-inducing byproducts, and worse performance and slower recovery between sets. All of this makes it harder to train hard and accumulate the volume and intensity needed for body composition change. So again, before we stress about our pre-workout meal, we need to make sure we're hydrated. The key is staying hydrated though, not just slamming a gallon of water like right before your workout. And remember, electrolytes are key. So we also want to make sure, like we talked about with watermelon, has some potassium in it, right? Maybe getting some salt in as well too. So for me, like my hydration strategies, I like to drink a glass of water when I wake up, have water next to me while I'm drinking coffee during work, which sometimes doesn't happen as I'm doing right now. And I may pay for that later. And then have some electrolytes before my workout. I like to have Element. No affiliation with them. I just like Element. Tastes good. Gets that salt in that I need. But there's other hydration like drinks out there. But I do Element. I think it's great. And I love sipping on that pre-workout. So again, while pre-workout meals are important, they matter more when you're doing more high volume, high intensity stuff like we talked about. We're using larger muscle groups. Training is longer than 60 minutes and you're doing multiple workouts in a day. So when it comes to your lifting sessions and just training in general, I'm more concerned with your hydration status than the perfect pre-workout meal. I just think that often gets overlooked. I think it can also lead to higher injury risk, right, when you're dehydrated. So we definitely want to look at that too. Again, there's a paper in 2015, Effective Hypohydration on Muscle Endurance, Strength, Anaerobic Power, and Capacity and Vertical Jumping Ability. And they found that hypohydration or factors associated with dehydration are likely to be associated with practically important decrements in muscle endurance, strength, and aerobic power and capacity. So we're talking really any sort of training that you want to do, being even just a little bit dehydrated, it's going to impact you there, which I told you is barely noticeable. Again, Dehydration Physiology Assessment and Performance Effects from 2014. The discussion of physiologic responses further helps inform and explain our analysis of literature, suggesting a 2% or greater dehydration threshold for impaired endurance exercise performance mediated by volume loss. In contrast, no clear threshold or possible mechanisms support the marginal but potentially important impairment in strength and power observed with dehydration. And then another interesting study, they found, this was from 2022, hypohydration but not menstrual phase influences pain perception in healthy women. And so they found that when they were hydrated, they had a higher pain tolerance, lower pain ratings, whereas when they were hypohydrated, they had lower pain tolerance and they had higher pain ratings. So again, that's just going to be like, hey, I think I'm closer to fatigue than I actually am, and I'm going to stop my set early because my perception of pain and fatigue is a lot higher there. So again, I just think it's an easy to overlook thing. So my main takeaways for today are, with meal timing, we just don't want to completely screw it up around our workouts, right? Get some protein in. If you don't need to stress over perfect pre-workout meals, just make sure that if hunger bothers you, make sure you're just not super hungry going into your training session. Avoid large meals before training. And then my big overarching thing is, do not overlook hydration, and most people do. And so that is my main takeaway for today, is focus on that. So hopefully this was helpful. Again, when we look at performance, we're not just looking at performance in the gym. We're talking performance outside of the gym as well too. Take the same thing here. Hydration is going to be key for how you feel, how you perform in work, or whatever you do outside of the gym as well too. And again, if we can improve our performance, like, you're going to see quicker body comp changes. And I just think that people often overlook the performance side of things. It's like, hey, the perfect calories, the perfect macros, again, the perfect meal timing, but we're overlooking something as simple as hydration that's going to really impact how you feel from day to day. And again, performance being another key thing that people overlook, right? It's like, hey, I'm tracking calories, I'm going to the gym, that should be enough. But really, as we get further into this, yes, all those things matter, but performance is one that's often overlooked and is really going to drive some body composition change. I think it just stems from like people being like, hey, you change your body through nutrition. And again, that's true. Like, we can completely screw up nutrition if we train, but we can also screw up our training by, one, not really caring about it, but also nutrition plays a role, and we can overlook things like hydration and everything like that. So hopefully that was helpful. If you guys have any questions on this topic, just make sure you give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN_. That's where I'm most active on social media, and you can find me there and ask me any questions. Again, I have my free body recomp checklist, which is in the show notes. And then lastly, if you found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find it. That's it for this episode. Talk to you guys next time.